Lean closer, for this is no ordinary pirate tale. This is the story whispered in taverns and courtrooms alike. A tale so scandalous that even hardened sailors blushed when it was told. It begins not with cannon fire or the roar of the sea, but with two women, Bonny and Mary Read, who carved their names into the very marrow of piracy. In an age where women were meant to stay silent and obedient, these two drew cutlasses, loaded pistols, and fought side by side with the fiercest rogues of the Caribbean. But their story reached its most infamous moment not on the decks of their ships, but in the cold, shadowed chamber of a Jamaican courtroom. Picture it, October 1720, the humid air thick with sweat and anticipation. Shackled and ragged, Bonny and Mary Read stood before judges who could scarcely believe what their eyes beheld. Women's pirates accused of crimes that had sent countless men to the gallows. The courtroom was packed with merchants, planters, and soldiers, all hungry for the spectacle. Their whispers filled the air. How could women lead such lives? How could they fight like men? How could they stand so unflinching before the noose? The charges were read aloud: armed robbery, piracy, murder on the high seas. The penalty was death by hanging. No one doubted the verdict. And yet, as the trial unfolded, Anne and Mary defied not only the empire but the very expectations of what women could be. Their words, their defiance, and the shocking revelation they unveiled in that courtroom shook the pillars of colonial law. Because when the judge demanded their final pleas, the women leaned forward with fire in their eyes and revealed something that no one, not even their own crew, had suspected. The courtroom erupted, gasps cutting through the silence. What did they say? And how did two women, bound for the gallows, turn their trial into one of the most sensational scandals in pirate history? That is where our story begins. The Caribbean of the early 18th century was a place on the edge of law and chaos, where the heat of the sun scorched ambition into the hearts of desperate men and women. The great powers of Europe, England, Spain, and France were locked in an endless struggle to control the riches of the New World. Their ships crisscrossed the seas, weighed down with gold, silver, indigo, and sugar. But for every lawful vessel that braved those waters, there was another lurking just beyond the horizon, sails black against the sky, hungry for plunder, and among the many black flags that flew over those seas, two names would come to burn brighter than most: Bonny and Mary Read. They did not begin as legends. They began as survivors. Bonny was born around 1697 in Ireland, the illegitimate daughter of a lawyer named William Cormac and his servant, Mary Brennan. Her very existence was scandal. To shield himself, Cormac dressed Anne as a boy for years, presenting her as the child of his maid. When the truth emerged, shame drove him and his small family across the Atlantic, settling in the young colony of Carolina. There Anne grew into a striking young woman with red hair and a temper as fiery as her main Dot. Stories about her youth were whispered long before she ever boarded a pirate ship. It was said that she once stabbed a servant girl with a kitchen knife in a fit of rage, leaving her scarred for life. Another tale tells that she beat a would-be suitor so savagely that he barely escaped with his dignity intact. Whatever the truth, Anne Bonny was not a woman molded for obedience. She burned too hot for the quiet, submissive life her father wanted for her. When she married a small-time sailor and pirate named James Bonny, her father disowned her. The couple traveled to Nassau in the Bahamas, then a pirate's republic where outlaws drank, schemed, and sold their plunder openly in the taverns. It was in that den of rogues that Anne met the man who would become her lover, partner, and co-conspirator Calico Jack Rackham. Charming, flamboyant, and dangerous, Rackham was everything her husband was not. Their affair scandalized the pirate world. When she left James for Jack, she did not look back, but Nassau was only the beginning. Mary Read's story was even stranger, marked from birth by deception. Born in England, also illegitimate, Mary's mother disguised her as a boy to secure money from a dead relative's widow. For years, Mary lived as Mark, working as a stable hand, a footman, even serving in the army. She fought as a soldier in the Low Countries, proving herself fierce in battle, before deserting and taking work on ships. Only when she fell in love with a fellow soldier did she reveal her true identity. For a brief moment, she tried to live as a woman, marrying him and running an inn. But when he died young, Mary returned to her disguise, drifting once again into the uncertain world of war and sea. By fate or by curse, her path led to the Caribbean. Serving aboard a merchant vessel, Mary's ship was seized by pirates. She joined them, still disguised as a man, and by chance became part of Calico Jack's crew. There, the strange twist of her life brought her face to face with Anne Bonny. Imagine the revelation when Anne, drawn to this skilled, wiry young man, discovered Mary's secret. Anne herself, already living in defiance of every rule society set for women, must have seen in Mary a reflection, a kindred soul shaped by hardship and fury. Soon the two became inseparable, just shipmates, but allies, sisters, perhaps even something deeper. Their presence aboard Rackham's ship was a shock to the crew. Pirates were brutal, superstitious men. To them, women at sea were said to bring bad luck. Yet Anne and Mary smashed that superstition to pieces. In every raid, they were at the forefront, pistols blazing, cutlasses flashing, voices sharp with command. They swore, drank, and fought with a ferocity that silenced doubt. One night raid became the stuff of legend. Under the light of a gibbous moon, Rackham's sloop bore down on a merchantman heavy with cargo. The crew, many drunk, hesitated, but Anne and Mary leapt first. Board her. Anne shouted, pistol in each hand. She fired into the darkness, the flash lighting her wild red hair as she stormed across the rail. Mary was beside her, slashing with her cutlass, her movements fast and merciless. The defenders broke almost immediately under the fury of their assault. Within minutes, the ship was theirs. It was not the men of Rackham's crew that sailors whispered about. After such battles, it was the two women. Hardened corsairs who had stared death in the face admitted to trembling at the sight of them. They were not women, the whispers said. They were furies. They were spirits of vengeance made flesh, but their fame painted targets on their backs. By 1720, Woodes Rogers, the governor of Jamaica, was determined to stamp out piracy. He issued proclamations of pardon to those who surrendered and death to those who resisted. Rackham, Anne, and Mary refused to yield. They continued their raids, striking at the lifeblood of colonial trade, laughing at the empire that declared them outlaws. Their luck, however, was running thin. In October of that year, as their sloop lay anchored off the coast of Jamaica, the long arm of the law found them. A vessel under the command of Captain Jonathan Barnett bore down on them in the dead of night. Most of Rackham's crew were drunk, staggering from the rum-soaked celebrations of their last prize. When the alarm was raised, chaos followed. Men stumbled to arms, fumbling with pistols, tripping over ropes. But Anne and Mary, they were the first to fight as Barnet's cannons roared. Shot tearing through the sails, Anne screamed above the din, "To arms, you cowards! Will you die sleeping?" She fired both pistols into the approaching boarders, her voice carrying like a war drum. Mary fought beside her, slashing at the first soldier who vaulted the rail, cutting him down with a spray of blood. But their fury could not turn the tide. The pirates were outnumbered, unprepared, and drunk. One by one, they fell, dropping weapons, diving overboard, or collapsing under musket fire. Only Anne and Mary stood their ground to the last. When the deck was nearly lost, Mary is said to have shouted in rage at the cowering men, "If there's a man among thee, you'll come up and fight like the man thee are." But no one came. The women's defiance was not enough. Overpowered, they were bound in irons, dragged across their own blood-soaked deck, and hauled aboard Barnet's ship. The smell of smoke and powder clung to their clothes. Their eyes, however, burned with something fiercer than fire, for while the men of Rackham's crew hung their heads in shame, Anne and Mary met the stares of their captors with cold defiance. They had fought when others had fled. They had proved, in the most brutal trial of steel and powder, that courage did not belong only to men. When word spread through Jamaica that Calico Jack's crew had been captured, the island buzzed with excitement. But when it was revealed that two of the fiercest pirates were women, the colony erupted in scandal. How could women live among men in such a way? How could they fight with such ferocity? And, whispered most often, what would become of them in the courts of His Majesty's justice? The answer lay ahead, in a courtroom where destiny awaited. Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read were no longer just pirates. They were an outrage to society itself, and their trial would not only decide their fates, but shock the empire to its core. The Caribbean sun blazed mercilessly on the morning Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read were dragged into Spanish town, Jamaica. Their wrists were bound in irons, their clothes still stained from smoke and blood. But their eyes, those defiant, untamed eyes, never looked down. Calico, Jack, Rackham, and the rest of the captured men stumbled along beside them, heads bowed, shoulders hunched in defeat. Yet the people who crowded the streets that day did not jeer at Rackham. They did not spit at the nameless pirates destined for the noose. All eyes, all whispers, all gasps of disbelief were for the two women pirates. One planter muttered in shock, as though the words themselves were cursed. "Not women," hissed another. "Witches." The crowd pressed closer, eager to glimpse the infamous figures. Anne, her fiery red hair tangled and wild, turned her head toward them with a slow, deliberate glare. Mary, her face thin and sharp, bore the grim scowl of a soldier. They were not cowed, not broken, and in their bearing alone they unsettled the orderly world of Jamaica. For here, in chains, walked proof that women could fight like men, kill like men, and defy the very laws of empire. The prisoners were thrown into the stifling darkness of Spanish Town's jail, the air heavy with sweat, piss, and despair. Calico Jack sagged against the wall, his bravado gone. He looked at Anne through the gloom, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though whether it was for failing her, or for leading them all to ruin, even he could not say. Anne's reply was as sharp as a cutlass. "If you'd fought like a man, you needn't have died like a dog." Her words cut deeper than any wound, and Jack turned his face to the wall, broken. The days bled into nights as the trial drew near. Rats scurried in the corners, Water dripped from the ceiling, and the murmurs of the jailers carried taunts and rumors. Yet Anne and Mary remained unbroken. They spoke in low voices, trading memories of their lives and recalling the blazing nights of Nassau. Mary the long years disguised as a soldier in Flanders. They laughed sometimes, defiant even in the shadow of death. And when silence fell, they sharpened their courage like whetted blades. For they knew the gallows loomed at last. The day came. The prisoners were hauled from their cells and marched to the courthouse. The streets packed once again with gawkers hungry for spectacle. Inside, the air was stifling, the wooden benches groaning beneath the weight of planters, merchants, soldiers, and magistrates. The judges, stern in their robes, sat with powdered wigs gleaming, their faces a mask of moral outrage. The trial began with Calico Jack. Witnesses were called, captains of seized ships, sailors who had survived their attacks, even townsfolk who spoke of the pirates' revels in Nassau. The evidence was damning. Rackham stood little chance, and when the sentence was read death by hanging, he slumped as though already dead. But when Anne, Bonny, and Mary Reed were brought forward, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Shackled together, the women stood tall, their ragged clothes clinging to them, their hair wild but their gazes steady. They did not bow, they did not plead. Instead, they locked eyes with the judges, as if daring them to speak. The charges were read: piracy on the high seas, armed robbery, murder. Each word echoed like a hammer striking a coffin. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for the drama. Women in the gallery clutched their shawls tightly. Men shook their heads in disbelief. Pirates were hanged every month in the Caribbean, but women pirates were an outrage that titillated and horrified in equal measure. The prosecution painted them as monsters. Witnesses described how Anne and Mary fought like demons during raids, pistols blazing, cutlasses slick with blood. One merchant swore that Mary had pressed a gun to his chest and snarled, "Yield or die." Another sailor testified that Anne spat in his face when he begged for mercy, her laughter ringing in his ears. The judges listened with grim faces, their quills scratching notes. When the time came for their defense, the women were allowed to speak. Mary stepped forward first, her voice low but steady. "I was born into hardship," she said. "I was forced to live as a man to survive. I fought as a soldier, I labored as a sailor, and when piracy came upon me, I fought as any man here would. Do you condemn me for living the only way I could?" Murmurs rippled through the court. Some looked away, uneasy, but the judges remained unmoved. Then Anne spoke. Her voice was stronger, sharper, filled with fire. "You call us monsters, yet what are we compared to the men who steal lands, sell slaves, and bleed these islands dry in the name of kings? We fought with our own hands, we took with our own strength. If that makes us devils, then we are devils of our own making. But I'll not hang my head for it." Gasps swept through the gallery. A woman defying the court so brazenly was unthinkable. Yet Anne's words carried a power no chains could silence. The judges, flustered but determined, pronounced their verdict: guilty. Both women were to be hanged until dead. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some gasping in disbelief. But Anne and Mary did not weep, did not plead. They looked at each other, and in their shared glance was a fire that no sentence could extinguish. Then came the moment that would immortalize them. When asked for their final pleas, both women stepped forward. Their chains clinked. Their voices rang clear. "We plead our bellies," they declared. The words rippled through the courtroom, confusing at first, then exploding into gasps as the meaning became clear. Both women claimed to be with child. By law, English courts could not execute a pregnant woman. Their hanging would be postponed until after they gave birth. The judges sputtered in outrage, but the law was iron. Physicians were summoned, and to the astonishment of many, the claims were true. Both Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read carried unborn children within them. The trial was thrown into chaos. Spectators gaped, scandalized. Merchants muttered curses. Some women crossed themselves, whispering of witchcraft. The news spread like wildfire across Jamaica and beyond. The two most infamous women pirates had cheated the noose at least for now. That night, in their cell, Anne and Mary laughed for the first time since their capture. The reprieve was temporary, but it was a reprieve nonetheless. They had defied the empire in the courtroom just as they had on the sea. Their legend was sealed, yet fate had not finished with them. For while the law spared them for their bellies, the noose still waited, patient and silent. And soon enough, the gallows would claim its due. The courtroom was still buzzing with scandal long after Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read were dragged back to the jail. The phrase they had hurled like a dagger into the heart of justice. We plead, our bellies echoed across Jamaica and sailed on whispers all the way back to London. The two women had cheated the noose, at least for now, and the colony could not stop talking about it. But for Anne and Mary themselves, the victory was bittersweet. The Spanish town jail was a pit of rot and despair. Built of heavy stone, it reeked of mildew, human waste, and the iron tang of hopelessness. Rats skittered across straw mats where prisoners lay huddled. Guards were cruel or indifferent, sometimes both, and food was little more than mouldy bread and brackish water. It was no place for women, let alone women carrying children. Yet Anne and Mary endured, their spirits still fierce, their laughter still defiant. At night, when the jail grew quiet, their voices carried through the darkness. They whispered of freedom, of raids they had lived, of enemies they had cut down. Sometimes they spoke of the men who had betrayed them, pirates, too drunk to lift their swords when it mattered most. And sometimes, in the rarest of moments, they spoke of their unborn children. Mary's tone in these conversations was different from Anne's. There was a weariness to her, a soldier's knowledge of how fragile life could be. She had fought in wars, marched in mud, and seen comrades die in ditches for nothing. She knew how cruel fate was. She would sometimes sit in silence, staring at the wall, her hand resting on her belly, her thoughts lost in battles long gone. Anne, by contrast, remained fiery. "We'll not die here," she swore one night, her eyes glinting in the torchlight. "If the sea wants us, it'll have to come into these walls and tear us out. I'll not give them the satisfaction of watching me swing." Mary gave a thin smile. "We've cheated the noose, aye, but death has many ways to collect its due." Their fellow prisoners regarded them with awe and fear. Men whispered that the women were witches, that their defiance of death could not be natural. Some claimed they saw sparks in Anne's hair or shadows flickering oddly when Mary passed. The guards, too, grew uneasy. They mocked them, yes, but never lingered long near their cell. There was something about those women, something unbroken, that unsettled men used to seeing prisoners crumble. Outside the jail, the legend only grew. Pamphlets circulated in Kingston and Port Royal, describing in lurid detail how the women had fought like demons aboard Rackham's ship. Tavern-goers reenacted the trial, laughing as they mimicked the judge's outrage when Anne and Mary pleaded their bellies. Sailors drank to their names, some with admiration, others with disgust. One thing was certain: Anne Bonny and Mary Read had become more than prisoners. They had become symbols, but the jail was merciless. As weeks turned into months, the women's health began to fail. The food was not enough. The air was foul, and worst of all, disease spread like fire in the cramped cells. Mary was the first to falter. She coughed often, her face pale, her strength waning. Fever gripped her body, soaking her rags with sweat. Anne sat beside her, wiping her brow with scraps of cloth, whispering words of encouragement. But Mary's eyes grew distant, haunted. "Do you think," she asked one night, her voice hoarse, "that God will forgive us?" Anne snorted, though there was no humor in it. "If he made this world, he's got more to answer for than we do." Mary's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Aye, perhaps you're right." But the fever worsened. In the cold stone of that jail, Mary Read, the soldier who had lived as a man, the pirate who had fought like a fury, weakened day by day. She clung on with grim determination, but her body betrayed her. In April 1721, she died, her unborn child with her dot. The jailers buried her in the churchyard of St. Catherine's Parish, a simple grave for a woman whose life had been anything but simple. Some say the guards muttered prayers as they lowered her into the ground, uneasy at the thought of burying such a spirit. Others whispered that even in death she would not rest, that her ghost would haunt the jail's halls. Anne was left alone. Her grief was sharp, but she did not show it to the guards. In her cell, she raged, pacing like a caged tiger, her red hair wild, her hands clenched into fists. She had lost her sister-in-arms, the one soul who understood the fire that drove her. Now she faced the noose alone, and yet the noose never came. For reasons lost to history, Anne Bonny's execution was delayed. Some claimed her father, still alive in Carolina, used his wealth and influence to buy her freedom. Others whispered that a wealthy planter, smitten with her beauty and spirit, interceded on her behalf. There were even tales that she escaped, bribing a jailer and vanishing into the night. What is known is this: no record of Anne's execution exists. She vanished from the jail's rolls, her name fading into rumor and legend. Some said she returned to her father's plantation, living out her days in quiet obscurity. Others swore she returned to the sea, disguised once more, her cutlass gleaming under moonlight. Mary was gone. Anne lived on, and the story of two women who defied empire, law, and death itself became one of the greatest scandals the Caribbean had ever known. The death of Mary Read left the jail of Spanish Town colder than ever. The corridors echoed with coughs and the clink of chains. But for Anne Bonny, the silence was the heaviest weight. She had lost her partner in crime, her mirror, her sister-nut. The stone walls felt closer, the air heavier, and yet she refused to crumble. Anne was never one to bow to fate. Even in the shadow of the gallows, her spirit smoldered like embers beneath ash. Guards who passed her cell at night whispered of how her eyes glowed in the torchlight, unblinking, fierce. Prisoners muttered that she spoke to shadows, plotting, scheming, her voice low and sharp as steel. The legend of Anne Bonny had only grown larger since the trial, and the authorities knew it. For months after Mary's burial, Anne remained in jail. The colony expected her hanging any day. Broadside sheets in London printed lurid stories. some claiming she laughed at her judges, others inventing tales of her spitting curses at priests. Crowds whispered, "When will they hang the red-haired pirate?" But the day never came, and then sadly she was gone. The records of Jamaica tell us little. There is no entry of her execution, no official account of her death by rope. Her name simply disappears from the jail rolls. It is as if the earth swallowed her whole. From that silence sprang a dozen stories, each more sensational than the last. Some claimed her wealthy father in Carolina had pulled strings, bribed officials, and smuggled her out. Others whispered that she seduced a powerful planter or magistrate, winning not only her life but her freedom. A darker tale suggested that the jailers themselves, unnerved by her fiery spirit, let her vanish into the night to avoid the spectacle of killing her, and still others swore she escaped by her own wit, slipping through shadows, cutting bonds, and vanishing into the streets like smoke on the wind. What is known is this: Bonny did not hang, but what became of her? That is where history falters and legend surges. One version insists that Anne returned quietly to her father's estate in Carolina. Broken by loss and weary of the sea, she lived out her years as a plantation wife and mother, buried eventually under her family name. In this version, she is no pirate queen, but a ghost of what she once was, woman who traded cutlasses and blood for cradles and prayers. Another version tells of her slipping aboard a ship bound for England, remarrying under an assumed name, and living in obscurity until old age. Some genealogists even claim to have traced descendants, though proof is as slippery as sand. But the tale that sets fires burning in taverns is the one that says, Bonny never gave up the sea. That she returned to piracy, perhaps under disguise, her red hair hidden beneath a scarf, her name lost but her spirit alive. Old sailors swore they fought beside a fiery woman long after Anne's supposed death. A figure who moved like her, cursed like her, fought like her. In one story, a merchant sloop was taken by a pirate brig years after Anne's disappearance. Survivors swore that among the crew was a woman who led the boarding party, pistols blazing, a cutlass flashing in her hand. She had hair like fire, they said, and eyes that burned with laughter and death. Could it have been or had her legend become so strong that men began to see her ghost in every battle? Whatever the truth, her vanishing only added fuel to the legend. She became less a woman and more a mystery. The trial had made her infamous, but her disappearance made her immortal. Meanwhile, the men who had once sailed with her did not fare so well. Calico Jack Rackham had been hanged soon after the trial. His body, tarred and caged, swung from a gibbet on Gallows Point as a warning to all. His name faded into infamy, remembered only because of the women who had fought beside him. The other pirates, nameless and forgotten, died too, their bones bleaching beneath Jamaican sun. But Anne lived on, in whispers, in rumors, in legends. Even sailors who had never seen her swore by her memory. In Nassau taverns, drunkards told tales of how she killed 10 men. In London, broadside ballads sang of her fiery hair and her pistol's smoke. In Charleston, matrons scolded their daughters with warnings. Do not be wild like Bonny, or you'll end on the gallows. She became a symbol of fear, of fascination, of freedom, and yet, beneath the legend, the truth remained elusive. There were letters, 2 faint clues, though historians bickered over them. One parish register in South Carolina lists an Anne who lived until 1782, dying in her 80s. Was this the pirate returned to her father's house, buried in silence. Or just another woman with the same name, claimed by legend long after her death. Another account tells of a grave marked only with the initials A. near Kingston, Jamaica, where locals left flowers well into the 19th century. Was it hers, or simply a story grafted onto stone? The mystery of Anne Bonny's fate transformed her from pirate to myth. For in the silence of history, imagination rushed to fill the void. Some painted her as a tragic figure who repented, lived quietly, and died forgotten. Others made her into an eternal outlaw, her ghost haunting the waves, red hair blazing in storms. And some whispered that she had returned to Nassau, slipping among the taverns as an old woman, laughing into her ale at the fools who thought they knew her story. What is certain is this: the Empire tried to erase her, to silence her name with the noose. But Anne Bonny defied them to the end. She survived where others perished, her fate a question that gnawed at the edges of history. And because of that, she became more than a pirate. She became a legend. Her story is not simply of a woman who picked up a pistol and fought like a man. It is the story of someone who refused to live within the walls society built around her. She was fire on the decks, laughter in the smoke, defiance in chains. She was proof that the world could not contain her, not even with the threat of death. Anne Bonny vanished, but in that vanishing, she became eternal. History is written by victors, yet legends are written by the people who cannot forget. And when it comes to Anne Bonny and Mary Read, history and legend became tangled until one could scarcely tell where fact ended and myth began. Their story did not end in the jail of Spanish Town, nor even in Mary's quiet grave or Anne's mysterious disappearance. No, what endured was the echo, the scandal, and the way their names carved themselves into the fabric of the age. Long after the trial, whispers of the two women drifted through the taverns of the Caribbean like smoke. Sailors who had never seen them swore they had, embellishing tales until Anne and Mary became something larger than flesh and blood. They were no longer just pirates. They became symbols of freedom, of fury, of a world where women dared to defy every chain laid upon them. Mary's death lent her legend a tragic sharpness. She was remembered as the soldier-turned-pirate, the woman who disguised herself as a man and fought with a ferocity that rivaled any hardened corsair. In London coffee houses, pamphlets described her as the virago of the seas, a woman cursed by fate, yet unbroken by it. Sailors told tales of her ghost haunting battlefields, cutlass in hand, still seeking revenge on a world that denied her peace. Some even claimed that on stormy nights, her spirit could be seen pacing the jail where she died, her shadow forever sharpening a blade against the stone walls. Anne's vanishing, on the other hand, gave her a different kind of immortality. While Mary's death closed her story with a tragic finality, Anne's silence opened endless possibilities. In every port, a new rumor sprouted. One week, she had married a planter in South Carolina. The next, she was sighted aboard a brig in the Windward Islands, pistols at her belt. Years later, old sailors claimed she lived in Havana under another name, still laughing with rum in her hand. She was a ghost, not of the dead, but of the living slipping through the cracks of history, untouchable, uncatchable. But beyond tavern tales and pamphlets, their trial had left deeper scars. In England, the story of two women pirates was passed around Parliament and polite society like a forbidden joke. Women were warned not to be bonny-hearted or reed-minded. Preachers thundered from pulpits that Anne and Mary were evidence of moral decay. that women who stepped out of their place would bring ruin upon the world. And yet, in hushed voices, some women admired them. Letters and diaries from the era reveal hints of fascination. "If women be but allowed to act with liberty," wrote one young Englishwoman, "who is to say we could not conquer as they did?" The trial had not only shocked the empire, it had unsettled it. For the colonial powers, pirates were already dangerous, a constant reminder that their grasp on the seas was fragile. But women pirates, that was something far worse. It was a rupture in the natural order, a rebellion not just against law, but against the very structure of society. Men could be hanged for piracy, and the world would continue unchanged. But women who dared take up the cutlass and command the deckwomen who refused to bend, even in chains, threatened to unmask the lie of male dominance. That is why Anne and Mary's story refused to die. As the years rolled on, they became characters in ballads and whispered tales told by sailors on long voyages. Artists sketched them with pistols raised, hair flowing like fire, standing defiantly on ship decks. Writers turned them into symbols of temptation and danger, painting them as sirens of the sea, half women. But no matter how the stories twisted, one truth always returned. They fought when others fled. They stood when men cowed, and yet the true horror of their trial lingered in quieter corners. In Spanish Town, older residents remembered the day the courtroom erupted in gasps when the women pled their bellies. Some swore that the judges themselves looked pale, as though they had seen the devil. Others whispered that the children Anne and Mary carried were not spared, that they were cursed from the moment of conception, doomed to carry the sins of their mothers. Tales spread of bastard children born in Jamaica with red hair or sharp tempers, rumored to be Anne's bloodline. But even in such whispers, the line between truth and myth blurred. What mattered was not what was real, but what was believed. And so Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read slipped into legend. The Caribbean remained haunted by them. Fishermen swore that if you sailed too close to Ocho Rios on a foggy night, you might see two figures standing on the waves, one with fiery hair, the other with the soldiers stance-watching, waiting, their eyes glowing like coals. In Kingston, drunks claimed they heard laughter in the wind. Anne's sharp voice mocking, Mary's lower tones rumbling beside it. Even on the Carolina coast, some swore Anne had returned, prowling the marshes in old age, her ghost still roaming long after her body gave out. But perhaps the greatest proof of their immortality lies in this: their names endured while countless others faded. Calico Jack, for all his swagger, was reduced to a footnote, remembered only because of the women who sailed with him. The nameless pirates of their crew vanished from memory entirely, their bones feeding worms, their stories lost. But Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read lived on, in ink, in song, in whispers. Their trial did not destroy them. It crowned them, and even today, their story carries the same scandalous fire. They were women who should never have existed by the laws of their time, yet they did. They lived, they fought, they defied. They turned their trial, meant to silence them, into a stage that shocked the empire and echoed across centuries. And still, questions remain. Did Anne live to old age in obscurity, her fiery hair gone to grey, her cutlass traded for prayer? Or did she return to the sea, slipping back into the life that had made her immortal? Was Mary's spirit laid to rest in the parish graveyard, or does she still haunt the jail where her last breath rattled? The empire tried to answer those questions with silence, with erasure. But but silence only made their names louder. And so, when the wind howls across the Caribbean at night, when waves crash against the reefs, listen closely. Some swear you can hear the clink of chains, the crack of pistols, and the laughter of two women who refuse to bow. Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read, pirates, outlaws, sisters in defiance, live on not just in history, but in every storm, every whisper, every shadow where freedom dares to take root. Because legends never die. They thought a trial would silence them. They thought shackles and gallows would end their story. But Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read remain mortal in scandal, eternal in legend. And perhaps, when storms rise and lanterns flicker on the decks of passing ships, it is not just the sea you hear, but the echo of their laughter. If you thought this tale was wild, wait until you hear the next untold pirate story, the cursed fortune of Captain Kidd, and why men are still dying to find it.